all this documentation, this is part of the e-form,
Correct.
though?
Yeah, all of that has to be completed and then uploaded. Not only completed, but some of it actually has to get printed off, signed physically. Then I have to scan it back in and then upload it.
All right, what is up, everybody? Jim to my right. Jim, glad to have you back. It's
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure when we get to podcast together these days. We've got Larry across from us. Now, if you follow the podcast at all, you know how technologically advanced I am, how much I love computers. We're going to talk today about e-forms. E-forms, I'd say probably specifically for suppressors, but these are essentially ATF e-forms, kind of a hot topic today. A lot of people are talking about it. It's supposed to speed things up a little bit. So yeah, even though we're talking about e-forms, I still got my paper forms here, Jim.
Hey, Mark, you will always live in the paper realm.
I keep the paper companies in business, so
I think you do.
We've got some of those in Wisconsin. They appreciate me.
I bet they do.
I mean, I like to think that they appreciate me, but
They oughta.
This is a lot of people are talking about these days. Larry, that's why we have you here, though, because
Has Larry been on before?
No, first appearance.
That's exciting.
I know we got a first timer here.
A little bit.
Yeah. Larry, can you tell people what it is that you do
That's
here?
what's going to be my next thing.
Man.
I know. I just figured I'd assist.
Thank you.
Yeah, so big umbrella. I'm the firearms manager for Vortex Optics. So that means I take care of all the firearm requirements that ATF and the state puts upon us as a big umbrella. Within that, there's a lot of different things that fall under that umbrella. So firearms maintenance, gunsmithing activities. We have a lot of different groups that use firearms for different purposes. Vortex Edge, or new products development, T&E testing for, how durable the scopes are, things like that.
Right.
Marketing. So there are a lot of things that the firearms are used for here. So
a lot of gun
oversee
activities going on.
A lot of
around
activities.
A lot of gun activities, a lot of rules and procedures specifically to that realm that you help keep us in line with.
And more to come, unfortunately.
Come on, Larry.
And that's the other part of my job. It's very difficult to be the in-between guy between ATF and my teammates.
Right. And as we speak, somebody is probably, it's free country, do it, and it's like, well, yeah, that's really great when you're not, a business with a tremendous amount of liability.
Exactly.
Well, Larry and I were even, pre-podcasting before you got here, Jim, and we're talking about how we're going to try, which is difficult, to stay away from the argument of why you should even have to have these things.
Right.
Because just at this point you do.
Yeah, that's not the point of what we're having a discussion about today. Yeah, I mean, maybe if we're in, the interest of,
if we want to complain for an hour.
Yeah, or more. It's also woven together that it's hard to talk about one thing without talking about the others. But.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so some people out there are interested in knowing, how to navigate all of the rules and regulations and all that stuff around some of this stuff that probably never even should have had a rule or regulation around it in the first place. But like we said, let's stick to the e-forms and such. So let's talk about a little bit of background about this, because when one goes to get an item that requires a tax stamp and a special application process for it, like a suppressor, or I think does it also apply to SBRs and all that stuff too?
SBRs, AOWs, machine guns,
Okay.
destructive devices, yeah.
Right. So when somebody goes to get something like that, like I mentioned before, there's this kind of application process you have to go through, and then also there's a tax stamp that you have to pay. Now, for a long time, that's still the part that people dread, I would say, more so than anything. But for a long time, people dreaded it, especially because there was this enormous wait time. It was a super analog process. I mean, you were having to fill out, Mark, a great deal of papers and things like that. And I mean, this is all, at least from my point of view, you had to fill out a bunch of papers, sign a check, send it off, and then wait forever, months, sometimes a year plus, while they were essentially trying to get to your stuff. And then in recent times, we've heard about these e-forms. Supposedly, it makes the wait a whole lot shorter. But I'm very much giving the 10,000, 30,000 foot view of it, right? So, Larry, can you give us some background about what all is going on here?
Well, even as far back as like 2004 or 2005 when e-forms first came out, I think it was around there, Mark and I were talking about a story that I had with it. It was actually pretty nice at first. I had submitted about 22 applications for suppressor transfers. About a year went by, though. Well, before that, it shut down about 2 weeks later. The system just couldn't handle it.
Oh, so they had e-forms.
E-forms has been around a long time.
Yeah, this isn't the first go round, apparently. Now, was that a volume thing?
It certainly was, and at that time there may have been 13 examiners that were in charge of approving applications for all different types of transfers throughout the country. So there really was many people working for the NFA branch to begin with. So they were just getting overwhelmed. But then the introduction of the e-form system was supposed to speed that up even back then. So once that happened and it crashed the system, they shut it down. Well, the 22 applications I was able to get in at that time, about a year went by and still heard nothing. Called to check on the transfer process because I'm a pretty patient person. I'm not one of these people like many these days, and you know who you are, who are always calling, asking, is it approved yet? Have you heard anything, any variation of that? And, back then, again, not having many examiners to approve these applications, they were actually answering the phones. So every time they had to pick up a phone and answer, no, your application is still pending, they're not doing their work, right?
Yeah.
So it's still today a perpetual problem, but at least today they have someone quarterbacking those phone calls, and that person takes care of the request right there. If they need to forward them to the examiner, they will, but typically that person quarterbacking can take care of it. But anyway, so I call and check on it a year later, and they have no record of those transactions having occurred.
22.
22
now,
of them.
In this case, you were an FFL, and so
Correct.
these 22 were on behalf of other people too.
Correct.
So it's not just you. You're having to be patient for your own self and your
Absolutely.
own business,
Yeah.
but then you're also having to try and relay this to a bunch of other people.
Yeah, who want their stuff now.
Yeah.
And it's still, nothing has changed with that regard, but
20 some years later or whatever.
People are
Yeah.
still the same.
yeah.
But and you use the word transaction though, because there is like a cost. So people, not only did you go through the process of submitting these e-forms, but like you paid some money there too.
Yeah,
Or you or the customer.
Yeah,
did.
so the customers pay the transfer tax, although the ATF, the way they have it worded, specifically it's responsibility of the transferor who pays that tax. But eventually there were some rule changes within the ATF that specifically said, since it is a private tax document, the transferor was the one who was responsible and could only access that information. But in the end, they ended up changing it to where they as the ATF saw it as a joint filing between those two individuals or those two entities, and allowed both people to be able to request information on that transfer process. So, and I can remember clearly, they would have this transaction number, for example, once you submitted your application. And I thought, I don't need to write that down, the pay.gov transaction number. Well, it ended up being a problem a year later. So even today, when I'm submitting forms like I was yesterday, and I see those numbers, at first I was writing them down, but I'll get back to that. So I get a hold of ATF, and they don't have any record of the transactions happening, and they ask for the credit card, pay.gov numbers, and didn't have that. So basically, I ended up having to go through my credit card statements from a year ago and submit proof that I paid these tax stamps, request a refund, and then resubmit all those applications, which for those individuals, they'd already waited a year, so it wasn't a good time. I think I was able to get those applications expedited, though, so that was the good news. But in the end, I had to pay the tax stamps again while waiting for that refund to come in, which at that time took about 2 months for whatever reason. So that was, I think $4,400 or something like that. So
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an experience. That was the first eForms experience. So
Right.
fast forward to today, the whole idea of it is to expedite the transfers. Now the dealers are more responsible for inputting all of that data versus an examiner taking a paper copy and importing it into a digital version.
Right. That was the thing that I remember you talking about eForms now. You almost have to try and release some of your bias that you have because you've been having to deal with this new system where you are the one having to put in all the information. So I come into Larry's office this one day thinking, oh man, Larry, we got that fingerprint thing. We got eForms now. It's going to be a breeze. Let's start transferring some suppressors and stuff. And Larry's like, well, I can pretty much only handle like 2 or 3 a day with all the other stuff I'm doing here because like it's just tedious as I'll get out apparently.
It really is. And the interesting thing is at the beginning of eForms, and with the many things ATF, and a lot of people know this, you'll ask one investigator, inspector, agent a question, and you'll get one answer, and you ask another, you'll get a whole other answer. So I had called the NFA branch about digital fingerprints and asked, well, we don't have a digital fingerprint scanner. Can we still submit hard copy prints? And they said, oh, no, it has to be digital. So right there, we were already dead in the water. Anyone who didn't have a digital fingerprint scanner, and they cost, $4,500 and up, right? So anyway.
And is that like if you were still submitting a paper form, the regular fingerprints would work.
The hard copy would work.
But if you're submitting an e-form, it has to be digital.
Well, that's what they told me.
Oh.
So I go out and I spend the company's money to, get a digital fingerprint scanner so that we can expedite these applications because we have a lot of them. And turns out you can still send a hard copy. Matter of fact, when you submit the electronic transmission, there is a cover letter that's included in an email that you're supposed to include with your hard copy fingerprint cards if you're sending those in. So, again, misinformation right from the get-go. And I try to be understanding because I understand the workload that they have, but at the same time, poorly executed. Because
for something that's like so incredibly regulated, like you'd think that they'd have the regulations.
Yeah.
The rules.
One would think.
Anyway.
It's been that way for a very long time. I've spoken to previous directors of the ATF, and each one of them, every time they get in, they think they're going to make it make sense and try to make change and make it more streamlined, and it's like the impossible, apparently.
Oh, I know what would make a lot of sense and be streamlined. You just let people buy suppressors and SBRs and stuff
Jim,
like
we said
normal, regular Americans. I know we said we weren't going to do it, but I had to do it. It was up there.
I'm glad you did.
It was a softball toss.
It's too easy.
We're all thinking it.
Yeah, it's too easy to do. But it is. The more I'm using it now, it is getting a little more practical. But there's still, depending on the individual situation, if it's a trust, how many co-trustees that person has within their trust is an individual. They can take anywhere from 15 minutes to a few hours to do one application.
Oh man,
yeah.
So the big thing, so you're kind of you're pulling back the curtain a little bit for what it's like for, obviously in your case, you work for Vortex, and so you're kind of like a dealer in some ways. You have to deal with the same stuff that a dealer would have to deal with, that people can walk in and go to. They also, of course, have to be going to the right kind of FFL because it has to be an SOT also, correct?
Correct.
So
should we let's do a couple definitions here.
Yeah.
So I think we either did or didn't mention NFA, which is the National Firearms Act, which these items fall
under.
Right.
Yeah, Larry listed them out before. It was suppressors, SBRs, AOWs, SBS,
machine guns, destructive devices.
Okay.
More things that probably require
a lot of acronyms going on there. Short barrel rifles, short barreled shotguns. Yeah, we got the. I can't
what was the AOD again?
AOW. Any other weapon.
Any other weapon. That's right. And then an SOT.
Special occupational taxpayer. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's different types of those.
Right. Oh, there's different types.
Yeah. So you can be like a Type 2, which is a manufacturer. Type 3, which is normally where the Class 3 idea comes from, but it's actually a type of license. There's types of FFLs and types of licenses, and that's the difference and what you can do within that license.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you got to go to what I was getting. You got to go to somebody who's an FFL and an SOT in order to get to one of these things. But the thing is for regular Joes and Janes out there who are going to these dealers to purchase one of these NFA regulated items. The thing about e-forms is that for them, it's at least supposed to be quite a bit shorter, right?
Yeah, it's
the wait time.
It's supposed to take between 60 and 90 days. I think as of maybe even this week, the first couple of them have been approved, allegedly. But that's to be expected. It just started a few weeks ago.
Right.
So there probably wasn't much to do to get a couple of them out.
Yeah.
And, they say to eventually the Form 4 applications that are done by paper will eventually be about the same time frames.
Oh, so by doing e-forms, they're kind of reducing their paper load. So then in theory, whether you go e-forms or paper route, it might be about the same amount of time.
Exactly.
I'm going to throw some air quotes out there and all that stuff.
Last year during a conference I had with the NFA folks, they were basically splitting their resources, half to paper and half to NFA. So that's the way they saw to do it versus hiring a bunch for one purpose or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine now the paper ones are really going to slow down, right? Because half of their workforce got shuffled over to the other side.
To e-forms?
Correct. But with the e-forms, with the dealers inputting most of the information into the system, that's what's speeding it up, really.
Okay.
And if your application has an error within it, if somehow it makes it through the process, because they did, and we can get into that in a little while, they did actually install some safeguards that would prompt you if something is missing or if there was some type of problem within the e-form application. But if it makes through that and there's still a problem, your application is just simply rejected. There is no error letters sent out as with the paper form. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough, your dealer would get an error letter saying, hey, this needs to be corrected. Correct it, send it back to us, and you don't lose your place in line. We'll approve it, and then you're good to go.
Well, I sure wish they would have done that for me when I sent in all those applications for SBR lowers and I accidentally put multi for the caliber.
Yeah, that was
like
a big point of contention, though, because of a number of reasons, but not e-forms related.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now your application is just simply rejected, and you got to start over again.
But they do let you know that it was rejected, right?
Yeah.
But you just go to the back of the line.
Yeah, so that's the other thing about this new system is it's supposed to be more informative for the end user. So they're notified as soon as the application is submitted. They've got all those numbers I was referring to, their control number, the pay.gov number, and then there's a third. I can't recall what that is right now. But you're just more informed along the way of what's happening. Mm-hmm. Whereas before, you submit your application by paper, and you don't hear from me until it shows up.
Yeah.
In the perfect world, because, again, you get back to those people that are calling every couple months, hey, have you heard anything? And by the hundreds, and you just get kind of worn down,
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I remember that whole process. You send it in. It's kind of like sending a letter off to Santa Claus. You don't know if he got it.
So
and then one day, all of a sudden, just, boop, it showed up.
Yeah, what I tell people, the indication that it arrived is that you see the payment is either removed from your checking account if you submitted a check, or if you submitted a credit card, you'll see it charged on your credit card.
Yeah.
That's kind of confirmation they got it.
Oh, interesting. So they're not actually, so when you, I assume that they were charging you up front. No.
They do.
Oh.
Yeah, as soon as they get your application, that payment is processed, not just before it's approved. So you submit your money or your application, they take your money, and then...
Oh, they're really fast at that, Mark.
They're really efficient at that. Well, I shouldn't say that, actually, because as it is right now, you submit your application to a bank. It's the NFA, but it goes to a bank in Washington State, and then they take the money out, and then they send it all the way over to West Virginia, the application to start to get processed. So there's government efficiency.
I'm sure there's
if I ever saw it.
I'm sure there's a logical explanation for that. Okay, so you know that they've gotten your application when you see the charge.
funds. Yeah.
Okay.
But
gotcha.
In the past too, there's been any number of people who've lost their checks. Not lost their checks, but ATF has lost their checks after they receive it. So then they'll send the application back, no payment received. That happened a lot.
Yeah.
So then I started telling people, don't send a check, or if you send a check in the memo line, write the serial number of your item that you're getting transferred. And then at least if it falls off, there's something to associate that check with your application.
Oh, okay,
Oh.
got it.
And that actually helped quite a bit.
Well, they
'cause then-
just write that in like the notes, the little
Yeah,
notes
the little memo
field.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually good for something, that line of your check.
Yeah, not what my buddy Eric used to like back in the day when you did buy something for me. Like, oh yeah, I'll cut you a check for that, and then he'd always put special notes for me for what the check was for.
Oh, Eric.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. But then, of course, the other issue is if you run into something like somebody else just ran into here, is you submit a credit card, then your credit card gets frauded, and you got to cancel your credit card. Then that creates an issue.
It does happen. Or your credit card expires by the time they get to your application.
Yeah,
Which has happened.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah, so it's a tricky business.
So between the two, we have
At least now, if you submitted it, they take it out right away when you submit your e-form.
Okay.
Because you're standing there while I complete the application. You enter your PIN, and we can go through the whole process, but you're there. That's when your card gets charged.
Let's go through that process. Like if a person's trying to visualize, like, okay, I think these e-forms are going to make it, they're going to simplify things. They're going to expedite things. I'm going to do it. Or, maybe I bought suppressors before, but I want to do it this way. Or maybe I've not gotten one because that was just kind of like a barrier I didn't want to deal with. What does that look like? Larry, I want a suppressor. Help me out.
Yeah, so the way I do it, at least here in another business, is that I try to do all the work in front before the customer actually gets there. So once they've decided what suppressor to get, we get it in. It's here. It's in our NFA inventory, which is visible within our eForms account. And so it's here. They figure out if they're going to use a trust or put it in their name as an individual. And then from there, I will do all the paperwork on my end, get it all ready within eForms. So I go through that process, and as soon as I have that ready, they'll come in, and then I'll do the final step, which is simply to upload the payment information, and we both sign and submit the form, and it's pretty much it on their end. But that's me doing a lot of the work.
Where does the fingerprint side come in?
Yeah, so
is that when they also come in for the payment?
Yeah, so I try to do it then at the same time, because then it's just one little element that I have to add electronically. Here it's a little different because I can call people in different times to do different things. But
Sure.
I'm trying to still develop a bit more smooth process of how to do this. So they'll come in, and I'll get their fingerprints. That actually provides me with a lot of their personal data that I need to input into the system. So it's looking like that's probably going to be one of the first steps that I'll do for people, is get them in, get their fingerprints, decide if they're going to do a trust or not. If they're going to do a trust, we'll get that situated. If they're going as an individual, I'll have all that information that I can populate the application process with. Upload their fingerprint electronically if they're doing that. But if your dealer isn't doing that, again, they can take hard copy prints, or you can bring in your own. And then, pretty much you'll still need a passport style photo. So you can do that digitally, or you just get one taken and then get it scanned in. But if you're doing e-forms, it has to be uploaded electronically.
Okay.
In some
And we've
format.
confirmed this.
Yes.
Got it.
What about like the new Real ID or the new driver's license? Would that doesn't count?
Has no effect at all.
Okay.
Doesn't do it, huh? There was once a time when if you were doing the whole trust route, you didn't even have to do the fingerprints because trusts ain't got fingerprints, if you know what I mean.
Oh.
And now you do.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up, because during that time period, and it escapes me now what they called that particular part of legislation. But anyway, when that was happening, ATF NFA branch got flooded with applications, because all those people with trusts now were going to have to submit photos, fingerprint cards, and responsible persons questionnaires for all the people within their trusts if they were to buy any other items past 41F is what it was called.
Right.
So, I mean, literally there were semi-truckloads of applications, and that's the times when it pushed it out past 14 months
Yeah.
for some of those. So
That's got to be when you see.
Well, because the trust route is no longer. I mean, it was back then. It was like, oh, this is the way to go. You got to do a trust. It's so easy. And then all of a sudden, when they change it, everybody was like, the trust is not the way. It's not the way.
Well, and it's not true. It really depends because 41F actually took away the law enforcement request portion of it. It changed it to a notification because before that, you actually had to go to your local CLEO, your chief law enforcement officer, either within your city, your state, or sheriff's department. It depended on what state you're in, and get a signature stating that you can actually do this. Mm-hmm. With a trust, at that time, you didn't have to do that at all.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
But as an individual, you did. So the trust was a way for people to get around that or circumvent it because their CLEO wouldn't sign the forms.
Yeah, in some cases it depends on where you're at.
Exactly.
If you've got somebody who's sort of cool with that, but some people aren't.
Yeah.
Larry, what about, so for this person, they've come in and you said, they identify whether they want to file as an individual or a trust. I guess what's the difference? Why would one choose one over the other, or do you have a preference of like which one makes more sense?
I personally I like the trust because it gives you more flexibility for future uses. So with a trust, it's the only vehicle currently that allows you to allow others to be in legal possession of the firearm while you're living. Okay, so if you've got brothers, friends, family, whoever you want to be able to loan that to take hunting, recreational shooting, whatever, the only way to facilitate that is through a trust. And you add them to your trust as a co-trustee. Depending on how the trust is organized, because there's many types of trust as there are lawyers, because they're the ones who are setting them up, how it's worded, how easy it is to add and remove co-trustees varies widely. But it does at least give you the ability to do that while you're living. So that's the main benefit, is while you're living. Mm-hmm. Allow others to have access to them and use them.
Oh, okay. I got confused. I thought it was the other way around. So the trust is still pretty legit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way to go. Okay.
However, so with that trust, it also gives you the ability to identify who you want to bequeath those items to. So it lists out your beneficiaries. A lot of people don't have wills set up right now, things like that. This specifically names people because with the ATF, if it's an immediate family member that this is being transferred to when you die or become incapacitated to where you can't possess it anymore, they'll typically allow you to transfer that tax-free to that individual. Okay. Now, if the person isn't immediate family and are not named in a legal document, trust, will, then they would have to pay that $200 tax stamp to transfer it from the person who is incapacitated to that individual. Now, within a trust, though, or will, if they're specifically named, ATF will still honor that and transfer it tax-free, even if they are outside of the immediate family.
Oh, okay.
So that's the other advantage, right?
Oh, my best friend Bob, he'd really like this. I'm going to put him on the trust. And
yeah, when you list him in the trust, it doesn't have to be as a co-trustee, so that's a different thing than a beneficiary.
Right.
Okay. Oh. So the co-trustee is a person who can legally possess it while you're living.
Gotcha.
Okay. The beneficiary, if you just have them listed as beneficiary, they can't be in possession of it on their own.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I remember you and I were talking about this a little bit. I think we had a conversation when we were talking to Silencer Shop, too, about this a little bit as well. But let's say I wanted to get, let's say I wanted to get 4 different suppressors, and I wanted to do this trust route. Now, some people say, and I think I even had this conversation with you at one point, if I'm remembering correctly, it would be beneficial to make 4 trusts and put 1 suppressor in each trust, rather than 1 trust with 4 suppressors in 1 trust. Or am I?
Well, you can certainly do that. So now we're getting back to the other point we were going to make about having other co-trustees. So within a trust, once you first start it, you can decide to just put yourself in it as the only responsible person within the trust. Okay. Later on, you can always add co-trustees. The ATF specifically points out that people should not be holding off putting other co-trustees in the beginning purposefully to circumvent the background check process for those other co-trustees. Okay. However, I mean, it happens all the time. You make your trust, and you're the only responsible person, but later on you get married, you have kids, or you decide you want Uncle Bob to use the suppressor. Depending on the trust and how it's organized, you can add that person as a co-trustee and allow access. Then they're not required to submit photos, fingerprints, and a responsible person's questionnaire. However, up front, if you create a trust or have one that you've used before and you've got multiple co-trustees, now the paperwork's flying, okay?
Got it.
Because each one of those co-trustees has to have fingerprints, a passport photo, and a responsible person's questionnaire. I'm currently working with someone now. I mean, they've only got, total there's 4 responsible persons in the trust, and it's a lot of paperwork. And there's like 9 different suppressors that we're transferring. So you multiply, that's 36 different documents just on the responsible persons questionnaire alone I've got to complete. So it gets daunting.
And all this documentation, this is part of the e-form,
correct.
though?
All of that has to be completed and then uploaded. Not only completed, but some of it actually has to get printed off, signed physically. Then I have to scan it back in and then upload it.
Oh, so we were modern enough to get e-forms, but not to use an e-document sign.
Yeah, so ATF does have an avenue for that, but you have to request a variance to accept digital signatures. So stuff like that's in the works, but yeah.
Okay.
Jim, my dreams of this being so simple have been
and on your end
squashed.
again.
I think for the person coming in, it's reasonably.
It is reasonably easy on your end. On the dealer's end, and that's the big thing. So we took the workload off the NFA branch, which is great because they can move forward now and process them, but they kind of increased the work on our end. So it'll be interesting to see if the market adjusts for that extra work that the dealers have to put in,
right?
To kind of compensate for that, because now they're still making their $200, but the dealer's still making the same amount of money for more work.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm following,
burning his time trying to get that all sorted out. I mean,
and we were already doing a lot of it to begin with, so it's still in the early stages, really, to see like how much more is it going to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking it's not much more, but when you're doing lots and lots of these things, it adds up.
I bet. What we just discussed in terms of transferring a suppressor, an already manufactured suppressor, so not one, you're not trying to make one by yourself or something. Remind me which form that is.
To make it by yourself is a Form 1 application.
Okay, but if we're transferring one that's already...
That's a Form 4.
Form 4,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if you're going to take a, AR-15 lower that you bought, when you bought it, it was a just regular rifle lower, and you want to turn it into an SBR, a short barrel rifle. So you could put a short upper on it and still use a buttstock, all that good stuff. That's the Form 1. Because you are, in essence, manufacturing a short barrel rifle, even though you're just clicking it up onto it.
Yeah, they say you're the maker of the firearm.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Form 1s also have an E-form as well?
Yeah, they do. So the other side of this with the fingerprints, so with the E-Form 4, again, that's for dealers only. So we'll get back to your Form 1. I just want to make the point about with a Form 4 application, individuals cannot do an E-Form 4 even if it's within state transfer. So if you've got a silencer you want to sell, which a lot of people think you can't do. Once it's yours, it's yours. I've heard that said before, but in reality, you can always sell it. There's just not much of a market for that.
Sure. Yeah, there's not really an advantage because...
Why would I want to get a used suppressor and go through all the crap I have to go through if I just bought a new one?
Well, there are reasons, like if it's a unique suppressor, which there are several now that are super hard to get, so that would be a good reason.
Okay.
Or you're getting just such a good deal on it. Someone's moving out of state and they can't take it to that particular state or whatever the reason may be. But if it's a good deal, sure, go through the process. But so you can do that within if you live within the same state, the transferor and the transferee live within the same state. You can do that via paper only. E-Form 4s, as of right now, individuals cannot make those transfers. It has to be by paper. Dealers can make those transfers and use E-Forms with electronic fingerprints. Okay. Now, if you get into the Form 1 side of things where individuals are making firearms, they can still e-file that, but they have to send in only a hard copy of the fingerprints. You cannot upload a digital fingerprint.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
As of right now, at least. I foresee it coming. So you go somewhere and you get your digital fingerprint file, right? So now you've actually got it. You've paid them to take your fingerprints, and you've got your file. Only you can really, it's just a file to you. You can't open it up and do anything with it. It's a specific format type called an EFT that the FBI uses so that it can't be manipulated and changed.
Oh, sure.
So when you get it, it's just a file. You can't do anything with it.
You're not gonna like open it up and be like, "Hey, let me look. I'm gonna look at my fingerprints."
Is
Exactly.
EFT? Isn't that the thing where you got like a picture of Dwayne Wade or something like that? And it's an EFT and it's worth like a gazillion.
No, that's an NFT,
Dang it.
Yeah.
All right. I gotta
So-
keep up.
which is different than the NFA.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So yeah, but in the future, hopefully, when you get that file, you've paid one fee for, you'll be able to upload it. But as of right now, you have to submit the hard copy of the fingerprints.
Okay.
So you can file that Form 1 application, print off the cover letter I'd mentioned earlier to submit with your fingerprints.
Right.
That way they can attach it with your application.
Right. Now, when you get a hard copy of fingerprints, you got to go somewhere to do that. You can't just do like the homebrew fingerprint.
can.
Like, I did it on a loose leaf piece of paper, can I?
Well, you can, but it's got to be on the FD 258 federal.
Okay, it's got to be
like
on
the
the right
card.
on the correct
thing.
card.
Okay.
And on that card has the ORI information for the ATF specifically. Every agency, law enforcement agency throughout the country has their own ORI number and information. So a lot of times if you go to a police, station or sheriff's department and you ask for cards, they'll give it to you, but it's got their ORI information on it. ATF will send it back because it doesn't have their info on it. So when you're there, so if you're like the sheriff's office, they print your cards off. Unless you give them the ATF ORI information to enter on that card before they take it or print it off, it won't be the correct card.
Okay. Got it.
But you can
How
take
do you would ask the sheriff's department then to print
modify it,
to
right.
modify it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of them are taking, digital prints, and then they can change it within their system. I can tell you a lot of them, they're just there taking prints. They don't know how to change the ORI or any of that information. But just be aware of it. If you do that, make sure they have the ATF ORI information entered.
And that's a single number.
Yeah, there's a number, and then they've got the ATF address.
Okay.
What if the
within it.
sheriff's department was like, screw off? Can you get it somewhere else?
You could, yeah.
Oh, you
Yeah,
can?
there are places you can get that, or you can just do it yourself. You can order the fingerprint cards for free from the ATF, what do they call it, the distribution center, and get the cards and roll your own.
Roll your own.
Yeah.
Roll your
well,
own.
yeah.
Which, actually, easier said than done.
So I say
though.
roll. Obviously, there's one part where you got to actually roll your prints.
Right.
We know what you mean, Larry.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting into some of the questions that are on the transfer forms now. So.
Right,
Yeah, right.
right. Yeah,
exactly. Have
exactly.
you been rolling your own?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, like, if you were going to do your fingerprints, though, like, it's not like the easiest thing to get a good print.
It takes some practice. I've been doing it a long time. I come from a law enforcement background, so I was trained to do it initially, but then once you actually start doing it, which not all law enforcement officers do it because there are people who do that thing, right? Like jail intake officers, things like that. But sometimes it can be very difficult. I've had even people here, we're all built a little different, right? Different angles of fingers and everything, and what's really bad is you get through most of the fingerprint process, and in that very last one, they mess up. Start over.
And then you're like, all right, well, we're going to re-ink all your fingers.
Yeah, and it's a process. And with some people, it's almost comical to see, the positions they get in to actually take them. And, but it's no easier with the digital system, believe it or not. Just yesterday, someone was making a comment that I thought this was supposed to be easier because we just couldn't get the system to really accept them. And with this system, though, a lot of them actually grade their fingerprints. So it's telling you, okay, this isn't good enough. So you get to a point where you can say, I think that's good enough. I'm going to go ahead and accept it. So you can do that. But it's chiming at you constantly saying that's not a good enough print. So.
Don't ever let a computer tell you whether or not your fingerprint's any good.
Yeah.
Darn right. I guess you have the benefit of not having ink on your hands, right?
Yeah, and the ink pads I traditionally use aren't bad. So in the early days, we had this ink you had to actually squirt out of a tube and then roll it out.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff was super messy. That's the stuff you wanted to avoid.
Yeah.
But nowadays, like, you can just get an ink pad, and it does a really good job, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonder what if I ever got into that. I wonder what the ATF would think every time I sent in a fingerprint. My fingerprints probably constantly change. Mark, you and I, because our fingers are always cut up and.
I know. But
Yeah, the
I
print-
think it always stays the
looking.
same though, doesn't
The
it?
print,
pretty
yeah,
much?
the print itself doesn't actually change.
Yeah, the print. But I mean, if you're getting all that crap on,
But
Oh yeah.
you've got some noise, we'll call it, that ends up being distributed in there. But if you're missing a digit, there's annotations specifically for that, or if it's just damaged beyond really a print, you can make note on that card.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And actually, the bar is pretty low for fingerprints with the ATF because of how the rules are written for ATF and how they're used.
Yeah.
They really didn't go into like how good they had to be or like how they're going to be processed. And that's what allows you to actually do them yourself.
Okay.
And
Oh,
not have to
okay.
go to a law enforcement agency or someone. So,
Gotcha.
Cool.
At least that's one thing that they're like. You know.
well, I think I wouldn't say that was intentional. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with all the the particulars and ins and outs of what we have to deal with, the minutia. Who in the future, who's to say what's going to happen? But
Yeah.
it's probably going to change.
We didn't make these fingerprints challenging enough. We really need to up our fingerprint game.
Right.
Well, if it ever came to it, if you think about it, I mean, someone could take someone else's and submit it, right? And how are they going to know the difference unless that person ends up getting caught for something or their prints are used in a crime, then it comes up. And, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why they shouldn't do it that way, but I'm not going to, add to that pile.
No.
Yeah.
No. The pile.
It's
the
already
pile,
hard enough to do.
The pile's quite large and smelly as
I was
is.
gonna say, and I think what it's made of. Looking at some information that I printed off here, Jim, from our friends at the Silencer Shop, going back to e-forms here. You can e-form you. I'll say you, but I don't mean you as the individual for all the stuff. And we covered some of this, but forms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9. But like we talked about before, some of those as an individual you can, and some you can't.
Yeah, so some of those forms don't even apply. Some of them are export forms and import forms.
Okay.
I was gonna say some of them I've never even heard of.
Yeah, they're
Is there a
for
niner
different
in there?
purposes. Yeah, they're just different purposes. But believe it or not, even if you have something that was transferred to you as an individual, for example, and you want to transfer that back to a dealer, that's still a $200 tax stamp. I was thinking about this lately. It should be a tax-free transfer going back to the dealer, but the ATF right now, it's considered a transfer and subject to $200 transfer tax. So we have to file a Form 4 and wait just as long to get it from you as an individual to the dealer.
And why would I want to do that at some point potentially?
Well, it comes up like short-barreled rifles typically in machine guns. So an individual owns a machine gun either in-state or out-of-state, and another individual buys it.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to transfer that from that individual through a dealer to get it into their state of residence. Okay, that's a $200 transfer tax to get it to that dealer. And then they have to pay another $200 transfer tax and wait again to get it from the dealer to them. So that's a 2-stamp gun right there.
And that dealer, is that in your state or is that in the
Correct.
state of the person
No,
potentially
that's a
purchasing?
dealer in your state.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And then they have to ship that to another dealer in that other person's state?
no, to that same dealer. So if you're buying a silencer NFA item, we'll just say from someone in another state,
Mm-hmm.
and they're an individual, they're going to have to transfer it from that individual to the dealer in your state.
Okay. Okay.
And, yeah. So once that's all approved, they'll ship it to that dealer, and then that dealer will start a new transfer from them to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2 stamps.
Tell you what, if this whole thing, if this were alcohol, we'd have figured out all this crap a long time ago. You
We
know what I mean?
did,
Something
Jim,
everybody
actually.
loves. We did. Something everybody loves. But also something that probably kills way more people. But anyway,
Well, we were talking about that earlier. The whole NFA, started right after Prohibition ended. So you'd
Yeah.
I think Prohibition went on for 13 or 14 years. And, of course, there was all the activity with gangsters fighting over territories and who's able to make alcohol illegally, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, in my opinion, really brought to light the NFA. I mean,
We can thank Prohibition, which was really a stupid thing in the first place.
How that ever, and even in what was it, in the 1800s, there was a tax put on alcohol, and as the ATF put it, it was unpopular, but yet it was required to generate tax revenue. So all this comes down to is revenue and taxes. For the most part, ATF does say the underlying issue, they were exercising their ability to tax, basically, but the real purpose, and they're open about it, was to regulate these type of firearms in 1934. So, but again, coming off of Prohibition of 10 years and, Bonnie and Clyde and all those folks shooting up the place.
Well, and Larry and I were talking about that. What I find somewhat interesting, or just interesting, is you've got these events that are negative. You shouldn't shoot anybody, right? That are being sensationalized by the media, and then the government steps in and says, because of this, we're going to do A, B, and C for your safety. And I feel like that's a reoccurring theme, Jim.
You're not wrong, Mark.
Was that a little much? I don't know. I know we said we weren't.
Those weaves we were talking about.
You said we weren't going to do these things.
You can't
Don't pull on the thread.
Oh my God, the sweater's gone.
Mark, what else you got on your pieces of paper there?
I don't know, Jim. I mean, I feel like, like I said, Larry and I were pre-podcasting, and I was just so optimistic that this was just going to simplify it in my mind.
It does.
And it actually, the good news is, selfishly, it does for me.
You're more informed along the way,
right.
So it just doesn't drop into the abyss once you submit your application, because that's the way it was. Until you heard from me. Now, that's not true. You could actually call the NFA branch, right? They tried to give you like a buffer, like if it's been, when you call, you get this answering machine. If you're a Form 4 applicant and you've been waiting for, more than 6 months, press number, whatever. If it's been less than that, basically just hang up. Yeah.
Don't bother us.
But then eventually they got to the point, after that, there was that quarterback again. So you could call after a time period went by just to check, right? Just checking in. And I always say don't. But you could call and they would say either it's approved or pending. So, okay. But it's pending pretty much once they receive your application. So, and that's all you're going to hear until it's approved. And then once it's approved, actually, a lot of people don't know this. They don't, like via paper, they didn't have just a roll of stamps sitting there on their desk to apply to that. You actually had to request a stamp from a different division because they're accountable. They're worth $200, to the government.
Oh, sure.
So once they made that request and got that stamp, then they could put it on your application, and they would in marker write your serial number across the stamp. It could take up to 3 months after they approved the application for it to arrive in the mail via, whatever the process was within internally. It could take anywhere from, a week and a half to 3 months. I've received them. Sometimes I've requested certified copies, which is a copy you can request if you either destroy your form accidentally, you lose it, whatever, you just can't find it. You can request a certified copy from ATF. You won't get that tax stamp back, but you'll get a copy of that form, and then it'll have an ink pad stamp at the bottom saying certified copy. So I've requested those copies, get those, and then sometime later the actual real one will arrive. And you can't make this stuff up. I mean,
no.
Out of all the years I've been doing this, there's so many little weird things that have occurred like that, and you're trying to tell customers this, and here our customers are our teammates, right? Mm-hmm. And they're just like, kind of looking at you sideways, and I'm like, you can't make this stuff up.
Right.
Right.
So people are, some people are up and on, like, government needs to make more jobs for us. And it's like, oh, well, would you like to be the guy who receives the request for a $200 stamp that's sitting on your desk, and then you have nothing else to do other than to just try and send out that stamp to another person who realistically should have been the one to send out the stamp in the first place? But yeah, there you can have that job, or you can go work for, a business that actually makes something. It's
a thankless job. I mean, there are lots of those in the world, but but that's their job. They chose to do it. And there are some people, I tell people this a lot too, within the ATF and the NFA branch. I mean, there are just as many people who are pro-gun as there are anti-gun. So some are, trying to, well, I shouldn't even say that, but, there are both sides of the team there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
take that however you will.
Going back to, hopefully you don't, but you lose your e-form or but whatever, it gets destroyed, or you've gone through the process, you've got all your documentation, you're good to go, you got everything, but you lose your documentation with that tax stamp, whether it's because you lost it in a move, you had a fire, whatever. So you can request that copy, but you ultimately still do need like an official stamp, or that copy will suffice. That suffices.
There forward. That's what it's a certified copy.
Okay,
is what it says.
Okay. So why not just have why do you need the stamp then?
Well, so that comes back to, again, historically, that was the monetarily issued value of that stamp.
Okay.
So it was like an accounting thing. So when I was with state parks, we had park stickers, right?
Right.
You have a stack of them. Those are worth money. So if you were missing one and you don't have the money for it, then it's like an accounting problem.
Gotcha.
Right? So same thing with the government.
Okay.
But with e-forms, you actually get a PDF document with a watermark of a tax stamp on the form. You don't actually get a physical copy. It comes to well, I don't know yet, actually, because we haven't gotten one. But traditionally with a Form 1, it comes to the applicant's inbox, and that's your form. So you have it digitally. So you can print it out and keep it with your item. You got the electronic version. Obviously, you'd always print more out if you need it. As long as you don't lose that, you're okay. But now with e-forms, I think you might be able to even go into e-forms and see your approved forms. I believe it's there. So
okay.
On the left side of the screen, there's submitted, approved, things like that. So
that's nice.
So, but if you want the physical stamp, you're always, at least as of right now, going to have to do the paper route. And a lot of people do like to have those stamps. I think they're cool. Mm-hmm. And they are worth money because, believe it or not, stamp collectors actually like to have those. Because it's a stamp that's
right.
I wouldn't say rare, but I mean, could be kind of rare.
Yeah.
Depending on, and again with that type of firearm serial number written across, let's say it's something that's not manufactured anymore or whatever, it may be more valuable to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I give my real stamp to a stamp collector,
well, that's if you get rid of it. So let's say you sell your item or whatever. Now you've got this approved Form 4 that's pretty much void now. Oh. But you've always got that.
Okay, got it.
You could sell that stamp off of that form or give it to your kids or whoever. But
I'd pick my most important letter and mail it.
Well, yeah, that wouldn't count. The post office would actually
be like, "Where's my 79 cents?"
Exactly.
Mark?
They would.
I'm like, "This is $200. This will cover it."
Yeah,
it should cover all my other ones too.
It doesn't work like that. But I think though they should send a stamp because you've paid for it, right? It is accountable for them. Yeah. They've got a stamp. I think that should get sent to the individuals.
Yeah. I wish it was really big.
Well, they are. I mean, they're not small. I should have brought one today, but they're not small. They're not like a post. I mean, they're kind of designed like a postage stamp. But yeah.
I want one like that big.
Oh, not that big. You could blow one up, I guess, and
Sure.
But yeah, and interestingly, they're specifically colored. So the AOW stamp is kind of a pinkish red color actually, whereas the regular like Form 4 suppressor machine gun type stamp, they're kind of a green shade.
Interesting. Yeah. So the form is the same essentially, but the stamp that you get for the specific type of item is different.
It's a different fee though. So with AOWs, it's only a $5 fee, $5 tax stamp fee.
Can you give an example of some AOWs?
Yeah, so we were talking a little about that. So if you've got
other weapon,
a pistol,
thanks, Mark.
Well, there's been a lot of acronyms thrown around today.
Well, no, so we discussed that one already, I think, but.
Yeah, so a pin gun, for example, things that fall outside the scope or description of those other short barrel shotguns, short barrel rifle, machine gun, things that kind of fall outside those categories. So you've maybe seen these little wallet handguns. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those. It's got like a rimfire cartridge within a wallet.
Oh.
I
think I've
pen
seen something
gun,
like that, yeah.
But
Sounds
also
handy.
something.
Give me your wallet. Okay.
Pen gun sounds fun.
Well, and that was the idea behind it, actually. Just gonna. But anyway, a pistol with a vertical grip on it would be considered an AOW.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I knew I heard people talk about AOWs before. I couldn't remember what context. It has to be under 26 inches or something like that, or if it's over that, then you can put a vertical or...
Yeah, there's lots of rules there. I would say
It's a
each time
bunch
you're
of-
gonna like
Don't quote me on that, anybody.
Yeah, don't. Anytime you're gonna do something specific, you need to look at those particulars in that situation and see which category it falls within.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if
there's a
you're
lot of
using-
numbers, a lot of lengths that are required, and
If you're using Jimmy Hamilton off the Vortex Nation podcast as your legal counsel, then you've got some big problems.
You got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
hey, at least they're having fun. you
Yeah.
know.
Well,
But,
yeah, that's true.
it would be fun. But
Just
Well-
show up in court. They'll play the podcast. You'll see right
If you
here.
Fast forward to 55 minutes and 30.
Yeah.
yeah, the last part I guess I'll leave you with is, unless you have other questions, is so once you within the ATF forms, from the dealer side, you're looking at basically what they call a train stop. There's these squares, a line, a square. So at each point, there's something happening, right? At the very end is when the individual is there to enter their PIN number, which is new. Because previously, before the launch of the new e-forms have been out for a long time. We've been doing dealer transfers for a lot of years with e-forms, and it's worked very well. But now the individuals were required to kind of update their accounts. When you first logged in again after the launch of e-form 4, you had to set a PIN number, and that's basically your digital signature.
Okay.
Yeah. So ATF wanted you to do that because, again, there's that point at the very end where you're digitally signing, everything's true and correct, et cetera, entering in your PIN number. But at that point, they really wanted to make clear that you weren't to provide that information to your dealer. Okay, so the dealer just couldn't be sitting there, has your credit card info to enter and then your digital ID. I mean, in a real world, that makes everything much simpler. The person doesn't have to be there, but it's a legal tax document. So they want the people to be there because they're answering questions too. If you're filing as an individual, you have to answer all the normal questions. Are you fugitive from justice, et cetera.
Yeah.
So you've got to answer all of those. And then at the very end, put in your information, your username for eForms, and then your PIN number. And then that digitally signs the form. And that's the end of it for you. So it's pretty easy, back to your point, Mark, about on the individual side. Yeah, it's pretty slick, especially if you can upload your fingerprints digitally. It works out pretty well.
Cool.
So, but even if you can't, if you want to do your own, you can submit them electronically. And that was another interesting point for all the dealers that I noticed. So we get copies of all the forms except for the Clio copy of the Responsible Persons Questionnaire. So if you're doing this for your first time, that form is actually going to go to the applicant, the transferee, in their inbox, and they're supposed to send it to the Clio. But on my end, there's still the Responsible Persons Questionnaire side of it to send. So really, you could bring that form to your dealer, I guess, and submit them both at the same time, or the dealer can just submit their portion of it, and then the individual can submit their portion.
And what's a Clio?
Chief Law Enforcement Officer, yeah. So that was the one thing I noticed that was a little bit different. You have to submit a copy of the application to the Clio and a copy of the Responsible Persons Questionnaire. So there's two documents you have to send to your Clio. But I would have thought the ATF would have at least sent the dealer a copy also of that Clio copy of the Responsible Persons Questionnaire.
Yeah. And the Clio thing is individual or trust?
Individual or trust. It's a notification now. So it used to be, remember, that you had to request permission, basically. That went away with 41F.
Okay.
But
right.
now
make sure.
we have to notify them.
Gotcha.
Is what it is of it.
Okay.
And why that is, again, not many people were pulling on one of those threads. stop and ask why, right? So in the 30s, right, there was no like national system where law enforcement was connected. You know, your local Clio pretty much knew if you were in trouble a lot or not, is the way we'll put it. So they were giving them permission to purchase these items, right? Mm-hmm. So fast forward to today, I mean, we've got instant background check systems in place. The NICS system specifically for firearms transfers. Why the need for this notification is still there, or even before 41F, why we had to request permission, that's still kind of a holdover, I think, from the olden days. Mm-hmm. That was just still never addressed.
Yeah, it's like, well, we've always done it that way.
Yeah, and some agencies just take these documents and shred them, and they never see them again. Though some, and I know of many of them, they actually keep a running file of these things. And for what purposes, does anyone's guess how they would use that information? So,
will it ever be addressed? That's the question.
Well, I don't know.
For almost 100 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think, we're pretty reasonable people as gun owners, most of us, right? So,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we don't really make a fuss because we're like, that seems reasonable, but it's a death of 1,000 cuts. Every time something new rule comes up, we're like, well, okay, that's a compromise. We constantly compromise.
Yeah.
Instead of standing up and saying, no, enough is enough. The universal background check thing that they've been talking about for a long time now. It's a good idea on its premise, but under the current way it would be done on the Form 4473, all the firearm information is there. It's basically a gun registration at that point because you can't transfer that particular firearm until, you get permission in a background check. But there are ways to do it. I just don't know. I'd like to think that someone else has thought of the ideas that I have, but I've had my own ideas about how to do it and run background checks on everyone before you do a transfer, but there's no record of the actual firearm recorded.
Right.
You're just checking that person. They can own it, give it to them, and move on.
Right. It's like you said, most gun owners are generally reasonable people. And when you think about it, if anybody who has a firearm, if they haven't even already obtained that illegally, in which case they're a criminal.
Right.
And they probably have criminal intentions. When things go wrong, they're a criminal already. They're nobody's ever somehow going to just be like, I'm a gun owner, I'm a very responsible citizen, I never do anything wrong except I only do things wrong with this gun. Like you can't separate the two. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal. It just is what it is.
The hoops and the cost are only being attributed to the people who are following the laws.
Right.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's unfortunate because I think it's in.
I'll say by and large.
In 2020, just Form 4 applications. I shouldn't say that. It was Form 1 and Form 4 applications. I believe the number was $86 million in $200 tax stamps is what we paid in 2020. That's a lot of tax stamps.
Probably all got blown on something
and
stupid.
And you can't even use it to mail a letter.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It actually just goes to the general revenue fund. If it went towards something that we believed in, purchase of public land for hunting, similar to Pittman-Robertson funds, right? I wouldn't care so much, honestly. Yeah. But it doesn't. It goes into just a general revenue fund.
General,
just the black hole.
and maybe $86 million isn't that much to the government.
Probably not.
I don't know. But to me, I think of what we could do with that money, like as a group of people who are interested in hunting and just other things that we would want to put that money towards.
Shooting. Yeah. Or shooting ranges. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Any number of things.
Like you said, something as it pertains to the user group who is supplying that revenue.
But again, here we're pulling on all kinds of different threads that are a whole couple-hour conversations in and of themselves, and it's easy to do with anything ATF related.
Well, I'm slightly encouraged and also depressed at the same time.
Yeah, it's tough, and even just yesterday, again, a guy walked in, and we started talking about some of this stuff, and it happens all day. Guys are coming in, and it's hard for me to take a break from it. You know, I live and breathe this stuff, and I really do love it and enjoy it. But at the same time, it's like I'm the middle guy. You know, I'm the middleman. There's nothing I can do it.
Yeah.
Our friend down in consumer sales, Ryan Muckenhern, you know, the way he puts it, he's like, you know, you need a shirt that says like fed, but not a fed, you know. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I have to enforce, you know, the regulations to make sure we're in compliance. And that's a big part of what I do here is making sure we're always in compliance. But at the same time, you know, I don't agree with a lot of what's there. It's just, it's there, and we have to follow the rules. And the rules for us specifically as a dealer, you know, manufacturer are much different than even just a regular dealer or an individual. You know, and where people get into trouble, and Mark can attest to this, is when you think you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. You know, because I think I don't remember. It was like it was a muzzleloader incident we were dealing with one time, where you thought it was a muzzleloader, but in reality it was a firearm, according to the Gun Control Act. Remember that?
I'm trying to think. Well, I know at least the most recent muzzleloaders that I got they did turn out to be muzzleloaders. Yeah, but I think we weren't sure that they were muzzleloaders.
Yeah. So the one before that though definitely wasn't. But anyway, my point is that there are lots of rules and regulations, and they don't always make sense, and they may never make sense. But consult someone who knows what they're talking about, and who that is can vary. Right, because you have your subject matter experts who are supposed to, but I can tell you from my experience, you know, really you should consult the ATF or someone who's been doing this a long time. Just because someone's good with firearms and maybe knows a lot about firearms doesn't mean they know everything about the regulations surrounding the firearms. So you got to be careful with it, but with all this e-form stuff, it's hopefully going to be better and, you know, make it easier for us to get stuff. But again, I kind of feel like it's like dangling the shiny thing over here while they're still taking our money, you know. Like, yeah, we're going to make it easier to take your money. You know? Yeah, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it's about, is tax revenue. So, yeah. Now they can more easily collect it.
And on that positive note. Well, at least maybe it's a little easier and quicker to get your suppressors and all that other good stuff.
I mean, like you said, I agree with what Larry's saying. It's the state of affairs as it is right now. It'd be like if you ordered a pizza and it generally took a month, and then now you get it the day of. It's like, well, I'm getting the same thing. I had to pay the same price, but I got it faster.
Yeah,
exactly. And you're more aware of what's happening during the process, so how it's being made.
I can't think of a better time to finally use this button, Mark. I'm just feeling that right now.
That was a lot. That was a lot to unpack. A lot of acronyms, a lot of stuff. But I think the bottom line, hopefully, we all know a little bit more about the process, and hopefully, the process is going to continue to smooth out and be, I guess, a shorter process, a little bit more expedited, a little more fluid. We're thinking positive here. And luckily, we have folks like Larry, who apparently their workload hasn't decreased necessarily, but it's taken the pressure off us.
Yeah.
So happy to help.
Thank your FFL and SOT. Give them a high five next time you see them.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that being said, do we cap this one, Mark?
Let's cap it, Jim.
Bye everybody. Guys. There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.